everybody. I'm Laura Lucas, and welcome to another episode of HABLAMOS VC. HABLAMOS VC is a Latitude Ventures podcast show that we will invite guests from a variety of businesses to discuss the current picture of the Latino and Latina-owned businesses in the U.S. Each month, we will have a special guest on our show, and today we're very excited to welcome Nicole Casperson to our show. Nicole is a journalist and a podcast host based in New York City, passionate about driving economic equity, and a founder of Fintech Is Femme, a media brand dedicated to covering fintech news, insights, and analysis while championing the voices of women and diverse communities. Nicole, can you please tell us more about yourself?
Of course, Laura, thank you so much for having me. It is always fun to collaborate with you and just generally catch up and talk. So thank you for bringing me on your show. I'm honored. A little bit more about me. I mean, ultimately, you hit the nail on the head. I'm a storyteller. I'm a traveler these days. I just got back from a 5-week international trip in all over India and some places in Europe, also working and for fun, visiting family as well. I'm a Filipina American who is also working on getting my own money right, who's working on trying to transform our industry so that it does center women and diverse voices so that we can actually power the future of economic equity and uphold all the promises that our products and services claim to do.
So can you tell us specifically more about how your journey started to lead and co-found Fintech Is Femme?
Yeah, of course. Well, I began my career as a finance reporter in the business-to-business media sphere. So I covered everything from housing and mortgages to auto finance to financial advice and, of course, fintech and wealth management. Throughout my career, though, no matter how hard I tried or how many amazing, incredible people or founders or analysts that I would put in front of my editors, my story ideas were often sidelined for the more clickable stories, and I say this in air quotes, of founders and narratives that were more often than not typically pale, male, and stale, which is also something that is said about our industry. I did not make that up. Someone else made that saying. I'm just using it. But 2020 happens. And while these narratives that male and CEOs are going to save the world kind of continue to permeate our media sphere, the reality is that when we have these same leaders in place and we keep amplifying the same type of leaders, they actually continue to fail the people that we're supposed to be serving, right? We're, as financial services, as VCs, or even as fintech companies, we're supposed to be fueling, empowering the most economically underserved, right? It's what our industry was designed to do, or at least is supposed to do. So for me, I knew it was time to get the Adam Newmans and the Sam Bankman-Frieds off the front page news and flip the narrative and center female leaders, center them around industry news, analysis, and put their perspectives and thoughts out there, just like it's front page news, just like anything else. And that's how I launched Fintech Is Femme.
Well, congratulations. I love reading it every week. I look forward to receiving it. So thank you for being on top of the industry and making an effort to highlight and make a change.
I mean, of course, your story has been featured many times in the newsletter, and you've also been on my podcast, and it makes a difference. I mean, for me, it's like when a woman or someone else tells me, hey, I listened to Laura Lucas, right, on your show, and now I'm interested in learning about VC. It's that element of you really can't be what you can't see. And so when you see just a myriad of badass women in fintech and VC and finance, and you see their stories, whether you're working in the industry or not, it makes you feel like you can do that too. And that's really like the power of Fintech Is Femme and what we're trying to build here and working on building.
Yeah, and we feel connected, even if we're miles away, or even if it's not even connected to exclusively what I'm doing. I feel connected to other women in the industry. So thanks.
Exactly.
Well, so thinking about, you talked a little bit about why you started it. Can you talk how you've seen the impact of it?
Yeah, well, I think a lot about what is happening in culture, right? The paradigm shift that our industry is facing. So the reality is that millennials and Gen Zers already make up almost 50% of the population. They're already inheriting over $500 billion of wealth every year. And they're already the most diverse population who actively care about sustainability, inclusion. And on top of all of that, half of our population are women. So our fintech industry and the VC space kind of doesn't really look like this population, and we're expected to solve their problems. So this is why women really are the key to unlocking a better financial future for the world. Because like I said, you can't be what you can't see. So I decide to highlight women's stories as well as individual female leaders, so others know that there are more people out there that are like them in the industry that exists, right? Like you said, even if we're in kind of adjacent spaces, right? VC, fintech, when you see others, you create a community, and then you realize that you're not so alone. I mean, the amount of women that have told me, hey, Nicole, your newsletter makes me feel like I'm not alone, or I'm not the only in the room, or that finally there's industry news that's, you know, fun or feminine or catered to me and my, you know, interests and needs. What that does is you really actually, by sharing your stories, you create new blueprints. So for me, that's the impact. The impact is a woman telling me that she's decided to join a fintech company for the first time because she's read my newsletter, or a woman telling me, a founder telling me she was able to raise money for her seed round because I highlighted her story in my newsletter. That's the impact, is being the bridge that helps get more money into the hands of women from all sorts of different sectors of fintech and VC.
I think it's wonderful that you're highlighting them. And like you said, not putting them in these isolated boxes or not seen in the traditional way, because I'll tell you that when I was at NASDAQ, one of the things that we always got asked is, hey, how many women have actually taken a company public from being a founder all the way to an exit? And the stats were astonishing because, number one, there were very few. I think there was under 20, but the under 20 that should have been highlighted front page of the Wall Street Journal because there's so few women that had actually IPO'd, were the media coverage was, you know, very sparse, and you wouldn't even know them. You wouldn't even know them. So if it was the reverse, it would have, you know, obviously been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So those are the things that I'm very excited to see more of in the mainstream media and just covered in a different way.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
again,
you'd be surprised, or maybe not so surprised, but you know, now that I'm in I like to think of myself as a modern day cool journalist and not a regular journalist these days, now that I'm doing Fintech Is Femme. But now that I've, you know, kind of left the more traditional media role, I have these deeper relationships with leaders in the space, with founders that are raising. And I mean, it's surprising and not surprising at the same time how I still will get texts, you know, from maybe a founder who I was supposed to have a catch-up drink with, who, you know, wants to reschedule with me because she's just like so disheartened by trying to raise, and she's in these rooms and she's just not what they expect, right? She doesn't look the part. She's not young enough, or she's not enough like Mark Zuckerberg, or she's not like all these things that she's not enough. It's like our world is too busy looking at women and seeing what they're not, instead of seeing all of the incredible things that they are. And so that's kind of what's exactly is happening, and mainstream media, and or even just what I'm doing, right? B2B media is such a huge part of the problem, but the solution, right? If we can acknowledge it and play our part in flipping the narrative.
Nicole, you talked obviously about the impacts of your work. What are you seeing in terms of innovation and technology and changes that are happening in fintech? I know what we call the bad word is AI.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm sure AI and how that's impacting the future of the financial market. So we'd just love to hear more about what you're seeing on your side.
I mean, how'd you know AI would at least be on the list? I mean, it's like, I love that you said it's a bad word. AI is so funny to me right now because as a reporter, I've been covering AI for a very long time, ever since I started. And so to me, it's not, you know, AI as the technology is not what is such the phenomenon. It's been around for decades. What is interesting about AI is the way that human behavior is changing and how human behavior is going to continue to influence it, right? So, we all know that AI can do things like help automate tasks and help make mundane things, less daunting or whatever it is, help you write stories. I use a couple of AIs to help me sometimes ideate for stories or that type of thing. But I think what's more interesting is responsible AI, thinking about the inherent biases that AI holds and how we have to remember that especially as leaders in the industry, that the sins of our past are not wiped away from shiny new technology. And even though AI is not shiny or new. So despite all of the good it can do, we have to remember that there's a responsibility there to help it unlearn biases. But AI only unlearns biases if we humans that are creating it can unlearn them too, which is also why telling of the stories is so important. I will end my AI soapbox there. But for me, I actually am really excited to see the industry really go back to fundamentals. I am thrilled to be going to conferences like across the world, from Money 2020 to Women's World Banking, and everyone is, discussing, industry leaders are really discussing what problems are facing the consumer today, instead of just trying to get more products in front of them in hopes that something, right, shiny and new sticks. So, consumers today are still struggling a lot with wealth management. And so I'm interested in seeing fintech focused on implementing behavioral finance elements or integrating things like wellness, right? I mean, the wellness industry is a $7 trillion industry. Could you imagine if we integrated it with the financial services or fintech space? There's still so much more room to actually help consumers, but I feel like our industry is so focused on like the next amazing vertical SaaS company, which is cool too. But I always like to think of the bigger picture of how the consumer and the world and the culture is changing. The last thing I would say is that I just got back from the Women's World Banking Summit in Mumbai, India, which really brought leaders from across the world, including diplomats and governors. And it was just in diplomats. It's just so cool to hear them talk about how fintech can serve low-income women in emerging economies and the economic power that places into countries like India, but also the world. And those practices can actually really be implemented in the States here as well, right? In the States, we tend to think that, oh, we have a large banked population. We don't have to think about, the fundamentals of what consumers need. But that's like a weird way to think about it at all, when we should be thinking about, okay, well, if we do have a large bank population, what about those that aren't? And even though we do have a large bank population, the average American still can't afford a $400 emergency savings, or people live with $100,000 in salaries still live paycheck to paycheck, or all of these things we haven't solved yet. I could go on and on, but those are kind of the top main things I'm always looking for and am interested in. We're back to basics.
Back to basics. I mean, I think we've seen so much change and innovation happen within the financial industry, but there's still so much more to do. And especially, like you mentioned, in groups that are underrepresented and impacted the most, that don't have tools into the financial system. You touched on this. So, Latitude Ventures, we exclusively focus on investing in US Latino and Latina companies at the early stage. And we see a lot of this innovation come our way, like you said, with allowing mental health and behavioral to be a part of the learnings that you have with technologies that are presented to us. But as you think about, not to try to bring AI back into this, but as you think about how the developments are happening, how do we continue to make it equal and have equal opportunities for underrepresented communities, given that, a lot of time the capital, liquidity, and these things that usually are available to other people that have more opportunities, or maybe even networks or connections that aren't available to us. And we particularly see this when we're looking at companies that want access to, maybe credit lines of $1 million to 25 million. And it's very hard to have support when you're building a business and you're wanting access to support how to grow the companies. It's still very fragmented in terms of the access. So
Right. And well, and then what's unfortunate sometimes is that, if there is a new technology, keep saying new in air quotes because not a lot of this technology is that new, but if there is a use case, right, for a technology that has become trendy or has become useful in a current time, it's typically, the first thing that'll happen is that it'll be used for people that are already advanced or advantaged, right? So how do we then instead think about when we build for the margins, we get the center for free? How about that instead, right? Like that's how we should be thinking. I've always been a fan of Latitude Ventures since I've gotten to know you because of that mission, right? Because you understand the economic power that is your community, and you understand that by powering them, everyone else gets fueled and powered too. It's just getting that message out there and having people understand that by fueling one economy, you're not taking from the other. You're fueling everyone. In fact, only fueling just one kind of person or economy or one type of human being, that's what's created this mess. So it's thinking about how when you do have your cause or your community or that marginalized group of people that you're helping fuel, especially with capital, with money, and serving them in their many different ways that they still need, right? Like the small business space is still incredibly underserved. I'm like talking about this on stages for years already, and we're still talking about it.
So as we start to wrap up here, like what advice would you give founders, and what opportunities are you seeing out there for entrepreneurs?
Back to mindset, right? I think the biggest barrier, especially in the fintech or VC space for entrepreneurs and founders, or I guess even partners, right, is the hubris that anyone can solve a problem without the people in the room who the problem is directly affecting. So that's number one, right? And so if you're a founder, I mean, you could be passionate about solving a problem and maybe haven't been directly impacted by it. Okay, fair. You better make sure you bring someone in your C-suite who has, or else I don't understand how you're supposed to build anything that's going to serve this person or this target customer if you haven't lived it. So that would be my number one piece of advice, because where we see fintech fall flat or financial services companies fall flat is just that, right? I'm going to be very skeptical if I'm going to interview someone who hasn't actually experienced, what they're trying to solve for. So that would be my first big piece of advice. And I've actually run into some founders who I found admirable because they've been, when they hear that piece of advice, they're willing to admit where they've maybe gone wrong, and I think it's never too late to decide that you want to make a change, and it's never too late to ensure that your company is set up on a pathway for success by ensuring that there's diversity in the room, right? I mean, innovation lives in diversity and dies in silos. So
yeah. Oh, I love that you're calling out that it's never too late. We get a lot of second time founders, and then even founders, we just did an analysis on how what the age range is within our founders, and we do have founders that are much older because they just keep at it and they want to try to continue to innovate. So I love that when we think about what that success and what that success is going to look like, that it doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter if you're first time, second time founder, you just got to keep going and understand the problem that you're trying to solve and have diversity of thought and really understand the community that you're serving and your customer, which is the most important, right?
Yeah. But I mean, I love that. Let's normalize, founders of all different walks of life and all different, especially, ages and backgrounds.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing, and we loved having you on our show. And of course, we'll have you back again sometime soon. Thanks, everyone. Adios from Hablamos VC. Thank you.
Adios.